51-year-old David Browning was described as the epitome of urban normality. He led a normal and stable life. He'd been married for 24 years and had 2 grown-up children. And then, his normal, stable life were massively jolted by the unexpected death of his dad. After his dad's death, David fell into this dark, confusing hole of depression. And other than his wife, there was one person that was there, that cared for him and tried to help him. She had no way of knowing that helping a fellow colleague could lead to such obsession and to murder. This is the case of David Browning and Jillian Howell. But before we get into it, disclaimers are a must. This is a true crime case, true story. So although I want you to comment and I do want you to share, please do be sensitive as you do so. At just 11-year-old, David felt abandoned by his family. His dad were in the military and he had to move to Australia. It took his mom and his 2 younger siblings, but he left David behind at boarding school. While at this boarding school, he witnessed abuse of the adult kind, and then when he turned to 19-20-year-old, he was also a victim. 30 years or so further forward, 51-year-old David Browning was nicknamed Spock by his wife. Yeah, that's Spock as in the Star Trek character. Apparently he got this nickname because of his methodical manner in which he attempted to do everything. By 2018, he'd been married to his wife, Deborah, for 24 years. Together, they had a 21-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter. He first met Deborah when he was working at the University of Brighton. They were both working together in the same department, and after a couple of years, they got together. Before his dad's death, David was really amiable, easygoing, friendly, funny, kind. But then on the 1st of November 2016, his dad unexpectedly died. It fell off a ladder. And at first, David seemed to be coping really well. But after he did his dad's coroner report, he started to suffer with depression. His wife says he was acting different, he'd distance himself away from the family, he'd sit up in his bedroom at night time rather than sitting with his wife. But we are getting ahead a little bit, so let's just take a step back. 27 years before his dad's death, in 1989, David Browning started working at the University of Brighton in the payroll department. Then after 26 years, in 2015, Jillian Howell took over the department. She was now David's boss. Jillian was 46-year-old and she'd been employed by the department at the university to improve it. It were quite unproductive. Jillian herself had been described as beautiful, gentle, kind, loving and selfless. She was a Samaritan volunteer and had suffered depression in the wake of her own father's death just a few years before. At the time of this case, she lived alone in a terraced house on Sandgate Road in Five Ways. She had a really close bond with her family, she had lots of friends, and she was a dedicated Seagulls football fan. Jill was gentle and a kind soul. She had an aura of calm and peace, with a warm heart and an infectious smile. She was a fun person to be around and was always cheerful and laughing. She was hard-working, had tremendous honesty and integrity, and had such a positive impact on all who knew her. Jill was generous with her time and loved to help people, always putting others before herself. Much of her spare time was spent volunteering as a listening volunteer at the Samaritans. And we are so proud of the support and kindness she gave so readily to callers at a time in their lives when they needed it the most. Over the time that Jillian were working in the university's payroll department, she told her friends she was really frustrated with David and another male colleague. They were being really resistant to the changes she was trying to bring in. Some of the staff members said that Jillian had picked on David. She shouted at him and belittled him in front of the colleagues. But they also confirmed that she'd offered to help him because he was suffering from stress and anxiety following the death of his dad. One of the 7 employees in the payroll unit said that when David and Jillian disagreed, there could be fireworks. If they did not agree, she would not take that very well and shout, intimidate or be very rude. It was in front of the whole finance office. It happened quite often. Every week, every other week. But as we've already said, Jillian were quite mindful of David suffering from depression. Having been there herself and been a Samaritan's volunteer, she thought she might be able to help. And I suppose she probably felt that if she offered to help and understand, it might ease work tensions. So I think what's going on here, or at least from what I've read, she's the new boss of the department. And as quite often is the case, some of the staff were a bit resistant to her because she's new to the department, new to the university I think, and maybe even more because she's female. bringing new leaders into a workforce can often make a very turbulent time. So, from what I see it as, in response to their resistance against her, she probably got a little bit of resentment. She weren't quite treating them as she was supposed to. And I suppose resentment's the wrong word. I think, as the other colleague said, she must have been frustrated. These are constantly giving her a hard time, putting up resistance every time she suggests something. That's obviously going to lead to some sort of biased frustration. And basically what I'm trying to say here is, I think he's been horrible to her, not being very accepting, so she fights back a little bit, which makes him fight back a little bit, and it becomes a little bit of a game, a little bit of a hierarchy struggle, and I think it just leads into a toxic situation. And it takes real leadership to then step away from that and try and resolve it, and I think that's what she was trying to do. I think she genuinely wanted to help David, but in turn that would also help the work situation. So on with the timeline of the events. It was on the 13th of May 2017 that David showed his first sign of wanting to obtain a shotgun. He googled shotgun cabinets. On the 6th of June, Jillian invited David out for some drinks after work. Together they went to Signal Man's pub in Ditchling Rise in Brighton. After they've had the drinks and gone their separate ways, David texted her saying, "I adore you personally and professionally. I am there for you anytime. Dave. One kiss." But over the coming weeks, David's mental situation, his condition, seemed to worsen, and he eventually told Jillian about his suicidal thoughts. And on the 18th of June, Jillian tells a friend that she knows through working at the Samaritans that she's really worried about somebody at work, telling them that David is suicidal and struggling. It was on the 9th of July, 2 months after that Google search, that David applied for his shotgun license. And that does actually make sense, by the way, because in order to get your license, they have to come to your house. You have to have a cabinet, and it's quite strict where this cabinet can and can't be. I.e., it can't be in your bedroom, because if somebody breaks in, they don't want you to access it, just then shoot them in protection. So it is quite wise to look all this sort of stuff up first, get a shotgun cabinet, and all that sort of stuff before you apply, because then they'll come to your house and inspect it. Anyway, it was the 9th of July that he applied, and then on the 13th of July, David and Jillian were supposed to go out for a drink, but Jillian cancelled. On the 30th of July, David was granted a 5-year firearms license, so he is now legally allowed to own and keep a shotgun. On the 2nd of August, he texts Jillian to tell her, "What a wonderful lady you are." The day after, on the 3rd of August, Jillian invites David over for dinner. She was concerned about him, and a friend did advise her not to do it. She basically said, "Look, I know you're trying to cheer him up," and that's what Jillian had told her, "but look, this is not a good idea. You're overstepping the mark of your professional role as his boss." But because of her caring nature, she thought, sod it, I'm going to do it anyway. The invitation went ahead, and David turned up to the house with flowers and wine, and Jillian cooked a curry. After cooking, they shared the chicken curry and the wine, they talked for a bit, and then David went. Later on that night, David, who let's not forget is married, texted Jillian to say, "Thank you for tonight. Can I just say now we're not full of red wine? I think you realise what you mean to me, as a person and as a friend. I will continue to be inappropriate at times to make you smile." So it's quite evident here that he's definitely flirting with her. He's definitely got some liking with her. Whether she's intending for that, she claims that she isn't. And other people round kind of say she probably weren't, she's just a very caring person. But he's definitely showing signs of flirting, if nothing else. Another 5 days on the 8th of August, Jillian contacted the university's occupational health department to seek help for David. Then on the 20th of August, Jillian told that Samaritan's friend that we talked about earlier that David had mentioned to her, "You must never leave the university or get a boyfriend, because I need you." And it was about this time that David started to suspect that Jillian were in a relationship with another man. This other man was Sean MacDonald, the former mayor of Worthing and a former detective. However, he was completely wrong about this. Not that it had anything to do with David, but Sean and Jillian were just friends. So in an attempt to put some distance between her and David, Jillian recommended he should see a counsellor from the university's occupational health team. And he was quite hesitant to start with, but he did eventually agree. I think the entire point of this was, "You're becoming a bit too dependent on me. You're in a moment of need, so you're attaching yourself to me because I care. Go and speak to the counsellor. You need to stop relying on me. However, after that counselling session, he said that he felt worse. And he told Jillian, the problem is, I'm not okay. I feel doomed. He told the counsellor that he had suicidal thoughts and he wanted to DIE. But at no stage did the university inform the police or his GP about his deteriorating mental health. Now that is quite key because this guy is a shotgun licence holder. And part of the application is your mental health. So all the mental health problems are supposed to get reported. That gets back to the police and then they decide whether they should take your licence or not. But these words, these meetings and stuff, all his mental health weren't getting back to the police or his GP. On the 12th of September, a month after getting his firearms licence, he put a deposit down on a second-hand 12-gauge shotgun. He also bought 50 shotgun cartridges and a lock knife. Altogether, that'll have cost about £1,000, and he paid in cash. It's also about this time that Jillian tells a Samaritan's friend that David told her that he's got a plan to take his own life. He also told a nephew about this time that there's a man at work that was suicidal, but she thought a lot of him. On the 24th of October, David hires a rental van from Choices, and he tells his psychiatrist that he wanted it to conceal his shotgun. Now, I mean, here, the psychiatrist has been told he's got a shotgun, so again, why weren't this reported? And the fact that he's saying he wants this van that he's hired to conceal his shotgun, surely there should be alarm bells. I'm not pointing blame, just saying. Now, in the run-up to this event, this murder, David had done a lot of thinking and a lot of planning. He'd even come up with a plan to implicate Sean MacDonald. That's the guy that he thought was having a relationship with Jillian, but they were just friends. He'd even submitted a form to the university's pension department requesting a change of the beneficiary on Jillian's pension to make Sean MacDonald the sole beneficiary. Beneficiary? Benefactor? Who cares? However, the pensions department became suspicious of that because the signature didn't really look anything like Jillian's. On the 24th of October, David had his last appointment with his counsellor. Then it was found in Jillian's diary that they'd planned to have another meal at Jillian's house on the 25th, the day after his last counsellor appointment. She'd invited him round again, and this would have been the second time they went for dinner. At 25 minutes past 7 that night, he texted her to say that he was on his way round, and when he arrived, he had curry, flowers, and a bottle of wine. At 10:30 that night, 3 hours later, she turned to him and said, "Look, I think you ought to be thinking about leaving and going home." And he responded saying, "I can't go home." So obviously she's like, "Why?" And he says, "Because I've posted my suicide notes." So Jillian's like, "Whoa, what do you mean? No, this is not okay. We need to take you to the hospital right now." So she goes and gets her trainers and a jacket, and as she bends down to tie the shoelaces, he stabbed her in the back. I was behind her. I felt this whoosh coming over. I pulled the knife out and stabbed her in the back. She fell towards the sofa, and as I stabbed her in the throat once, she grabbed the knife with her hand and screamed, "You bastard!" I said, "Sorry, Jill, this is what mental health does to you." Now that line is this is what mental health does to you. Now that's an excuse. If you can say that line there and then, that's an excuse. I'm very conscious of my mental health. I know where I am in the dips of a roller coaster. But I don't think I've ever done something and in that moment said, it's because of my mental health. I think I can look back and go, that's the way I'm acting like that because of my mental health. But at no point am I doing something, acting irrational, and in that moment of irrationally going, "Oh, look, it's my mental health, it's fine, just ignore it." No. In my eyes, that's the thing that completely ruins his defence on this. But back to the actual information. David Browning had stabbed Jillian Howell 15 times in total. 8 times to the neck, 6 times to the chest, and once in the back. As she laid in a pool of blood on the lounge floor, David scrawled the word "bully" across her forehead in marker pen. He also then went on to write messages on the wall in spray paint, including one which blamed the murder on Sean MacDonald. In the early hours, it's now 25 minutes past 4 in the morning, and David's still in Jillian's house. He Googles suicide with a shotgun, He then posted a picture of the poster onto Facebook that reads, "Stand up to bullies, then kill them." I don't know how true it is, but I read that David had tried to shoot himself in the head with a shotgun, but the barrel was too long, so he couldn't quite reach the trigger. He also spent an hour on the phone to the Samaritans. He told the operator that he's done something really bad. He stabbed somebody, his boss, a female. He said that he was still in the house, but he didn't want to look at her, and he hadn't gone to her house with the intention of killing her. He said that during that call he was very coherent, very engaging, and sounded quite shocked. He ended the call by telling the operator, "I'm going to decide now whether to shoot myself or hand myself in." In all, after killing Jillian, he'd stayed in her house for up to 6 hours. And then he went to John Street Police Station in Brighton. At 8 minutes past 6 in the morning, he called 999 off an emergency phone outside the police station, and here's a part of the call.
It's an officer.
When officers went outside and met him, they said that he appeared calm, coherent and collected. He told them, "I wanted to kill myself, but I've killed somebody else instead." He held out his shotgun, guiding the officers to the murder weapon, which was the lock knife that he'd previously bought, and it was located in his jacket pocket. When asked what had happened, he said, "In a nutshell, I've killed my boss." Here's a part of his interactions with the police.
Where have you killed her?
8 Sandgate Road.
8 Sandgate Road. And where is Sandgate Road?
Off Kitchen Road.
An evidence. Do you understand that?
I understand.
He told the police that they should go round to Jillian's house on Sandgate Road, where they'd find the front door was on the latch for easy access. So at 6:30 that morning, the police arrived at Jillian's house. And of course, they found Jillian's body in the lounge, and there was also a note that had been written from David on the table. While David was in custody, police started a painstaking forensic investigation. It included house-to-house inquiries, mobile phone analysis, conversations with colleagues, media inquiries and media appeals to try and piece together exactly what had happened. And it turned out in the run-up to the murder, as part of his preparation, David had also deleted messages. A lot of messages. He deleted the data on his phone and took a change of clothes as well as his shotgun to a crime scene. Further evidence of his intention to kill Jillian was found in several suicide notes that he'd written and posted to relatives and work colleagues. So it seems he definitely intended to take his own life. To his wife, part of the letter said, "I'm so sorry you've had to go through this. I was waking into tension every day. I know what I've done is wrong. I was fed up of being belittled." One addressed to his mom and to other people said, "I did the right thing and rid the world of a horrid person." Another addressed to some colleagues said, "Of course this was the wrong thing to do. I was fed up of working as a slave." See, it is strange that he's told his wife and his colleagues that he knows it's the wrong thing to do, but he's told his mom and some other people that he thinks it was the right thing to do. I think that is very, very interesting. But this is where the case gets a little bit twisty-turvy, because obviously he's implicated Sean McDonald. So the police had to go and investigate him. And Sean McDonald said that he'd never even heard of, never alone seen or spoke to David Browning. That was until a police officer knocked on his door on the 26th of October, which is the day that David had been arrested. I mean, just imagine. Not only has this police officer come to tell you the devastating news that your soulmate's been killed in her own home, but he's also come to tell you that there's evidence of the crime that indicates you're involved. Sean had served as a police officer for 30 years, and he was told that not only did the graffiti inside the house implicate him, as well as a forged will that made him the sole beneficiary, but also the letter that David had left there completely implicated him. I'd read you the letter, it is on screen now, but honestly, it's visually too hard for me to read. Apparently it claims that Sean and David were supposed to share the proceeds from the forged will. And I mean, David had done his research on Sean. He'd stored his number in his phone just a few days prior, and had even found out Sean's address, although he'd never contacted him. David had even gone to the extent of asking a friend to send a vitriolic letter to Sean in the months, and I mean months after the murder, just to further implicate him. He'd really thought this through, but Sean's email and phone records were searched by police, and obviously nothing was found. And David did later admit that he was behind the entire thing, and he wanted to set Sean up to be the scapegoat. Sean later talked to the media and told them about the entire thing, about how he was set up by David, despite the fact that they'd never talked to each other. And he also said that he painted Jill to be this demon and bully at work, but no one has a bad word to say about her. In the end, he had to admit that he wrote bully on her forehead, but she wasn't one. She was not like that. She was an absolutely lovely person, and I was not in any way involved. David Browning did admit to killing Jillian Howell, but he denied the charge of murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility. So it went to trial. And during the 2-week trial at Hove Crown Court, the defence said it is a fact that he was diagnosed as suffering from a depressive condition. It was clearly triggered by his father's tragic death. It does not excuse what he did. And I mean, that's the defence saying that. And during the 2-week trial at Hove Crown Court, the prosecution put to him, "This is all about your problems, your needs. You have taken her life away because of your problems. Is that not a selfish act?" To that, David replied, "Of course it is. I had lots of problems. I cannot cope with my problems. What I wanted was to get the old Dave Browning back, not the shell of the person I was becoming." David also told the court that he first thought about killing Jillian 2 weeks prior to the murder. In the end, it took the jury just 2 hours and 20 minutes of deliberation to find David Browning guilty of murder. As it were read out in court, the victim's family and friends gasped audibly and shouted yes as the jury rejected his claims of diminished responsibility. As the judge sentenced him, he sat with a pile of papers, taking notes and listening intently to the mitigating factors. But as he was sentenced, he just stared at the floor. It said during that day, during that sentencing, he showed no sign of emotion or remorse. So David Browning was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 28 years, meaning he won't be eligible for parole until he's in his 70s. The last thing I've got to say is the Brighton and Hove Albion players, aka the Seagulls Football Club, led a minute applause in Jillian's memory at their first match after her death. Oh, and Mrs. Brown, David's wife, he knew that he'd be meeting Jillian for a drink after work. However, she didn't know that he'd been going round to her house. That's all I've got for you. And there it is again, a case where somebody was helping somebody in need and it backfired on them. And I'm going to say it again, and I'm never going to stop saying this. Don't stop helping people. But what we do need to do is we need to be careful. Depression doesn't always mean they're going to hurt themselves. Mental illness is this incredible thing, and if you're not a qualified psychiatrist, don't act as one. Try not to become someone's lifeline. You can help without putting yourself in that position. Of course, again, I will put mental health support links down below in the description for the 3 most viewing countries, which is usually UK, Australia and America. I'll put them down in the description. And I also wanted to put out as well that the media have massively, as they always do, have focused on the shotgun licence thing. Now, I don't think this is the police's problem, because they weren't made aware of his mental health. He were interviewed, he did deny having them feelings, the doctors didn't have any record of it, but all in all, he didn't use his shotgun to hurt himself or anybody else, even if it weren't for lack of trying. So, pointing out that he had a licence, in my eyes, is slightly irrelevant because the weapon he used, he could have still got with or without a licence. But it is something that the media have tried to jab in there, as they always do. Which is, I know it's just typical media crap, but there you go. I think there were other points that I wanted to make. But it's like 28 degrees today, so I forgot. Another advice, bearing in mind I'm not a professional either, but I think another great thing would be to set boundaries in your head before you start trying to help somebody. Now, the reason it's important before, and you don't necessarily have to tell them the boundaries, but as long as you know what they are, because as soon as you start getting emotionally involved with somebody, even if you don't mean to, them boundaries will start to blur in your head. So if you've got that set out before, do it now, as in a mental exercise. In this situation, where would you have drawn the line? And then if you're ever in this situation, you can always refer back to that mental thought of going, that's where I should end it. That's where I should draw the line. Because like I said, once you're already in that moment, emotions are going to be running high. You're going to feel more indebted, more needing to help. When in reality, David wasn't Jillian's problem. He had a wife, he had a support network. His job provided mental support for him. And I'm not saying it's Jillian's fault. She was just trying to do a good thing. It's completely David's fault. And I'm glad that the court didn't give him diminished responsibility. But at the same point, there is, for me, throughout this case, there's lines where she passed her professional line. Inviting him round to her house for dinner isn't professional. Going out for a drink, maybe. But then, when he's saying things, there's one part where... Well, there's a few parts where he's saying things to her, telling her how incredible she is and everything else. And it seems a bit too flirty. Now, she might have texted him and said, whoa. She might have said in person, whoa, there's a line. But to me, if it keeps happening, that's where it should have... No, stop it. Whoa. We are not in that kind of relationship. You're an employee. I'm your boss. I care about you. In that way, and no other way. Anyway, that's enough rambling from me. I'm going to go and hide from this sun. All I'm saying is, I love you. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. And I'll see you next week. Bye.